Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone. And now, here's your host and CEO of Rue Global Impact, Deborah Rue.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. We're going to talk about a topic today that we all really need to probably pay more attention to. We need to really take care of these beautiful biological bodies that we have and our brains and all of our organs and stuff. And I know that during COVID-19, I was hearing comments like COVID-15 and things where people were gaining an average of 15 pounds and stuff. But also, I continue to hear during these very intense times how important self-care is. And so this is a topic about self-care, how we take care of ourselves, we take care of others, and we make sure that our bodies are prepared to be able to handle the stress and the intensity that we're all living with. So today I'm talking to two really brilliant women from Dynamic Brain Consulting, which is a great name. So I have Kristen Allott, and I have my notes here. I have Natasha Duarte, which I probably said that incorrect.
Oh, perfect.
So Natasha, you're joining, I know, from Vermont. Kristen, where are you joining from?
I'm in Tacoma, Washington.
Cool. And I'm joining from Rockville, Virginia. So
we've got it covered.
That's right. We've got all the different places in the U.S. So Kristen, why don't we start with you and give us a little bit of background about who you are, how you came to this work, and also just a little bit about the company, and then we'll pass it to Natasha.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for inviting us and the work that you've done. I've been listening to more and more of your podcasts. And so my background is I'm a naturopathic physician and an acupuncturist, and I have a clinical practice in Washington, the state of Washington, focusing in on non-pharmaceutical interventions for mental health. I just have to say, prior to becoming a naturopath, I struggled in school, and at 21 got tested and found out that my reading and writing level was not out of junior high school. And the person who was testing me neglected to read my forms to find out that I was about to graduate from a top college in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And she told me that I might make it through community college if I'm lucky. And so I was really appreciating your conversation with Lauren, who I'm not going to be able to say her name, but the previous, just this week in March, who is a mental health professional who was talking about like just the impact of disabilities, and that it's not causing mental health problems necessarily, but mental health professionals focus on it. Anyway, I bring that up partly because as I moved forward and really worked with a lot of people with depression and anxiety and PTSD and addictions, and really saw the value of feeding them, because most of my clients were on 4 or 5 psychotropic meds, really heavy medicated. And I was like, let's just start with breakfast. And because what I knew with a neuroatypical brain, that if I didn't eat, I couldn't spell my name. And as I look back, probably interest in optimizing brain function really came because I have to. And so over time, my practice became more and more about the importance of eating and fueling your brain, the importance of sleeping, the importance of moving your body. And then I moved out to work with corporate clients and then courts, because I wanted to work within communities, because that's where we actually have permission to take care of ourselves. And I really wanted people to have that information. And then it became clear I needed to write a book. And Natasha and I have been friends since we were in our early 20s. At dates that we're not going to mention. And I was like, hey, I need some help moving into a bigger corporate organizational development, organizational environment. And you have the skills, and will you help me write a book? And she said, yes, which is still just one of the best things that have happened. So that's a little bit about my background and how we got together.
And Natasha, before you
Mhm.
start, I'll just say it was Lauren Prosciutti, and
Oh,
she
yeah.
said she is a licensed counselor, and she also is a woman that was born with muscular dystrophy. But I thought it was so powerful when she said, if the only thing I had to deal with was my muscular dystrophy, my life would be so much easier. But I actually have to deal with society deciding that I'm disabled and not capable of doing things. So society actually
Yeah.
disables her, which I believe society chooses not to make things accessible. Society doesn't include us. Society leaves us out. And I also want to make a comment before Natasha joins the conversation in that there's a lot of very scary statistics out there that's saying after we get past COVID-19, many Americans, just looking at from the U.S. lens, are going to have PTSD. And
For
I
sure.
noticed during the intensity of all this that I started noticing my depression was getting worse. And I started thinking, I wonder if I'm drinking enough water, because I didn't realize if you don't drink enough water, that can cause depression. So we're going to dig into all this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Natasha, let's talk more about what you're doing and the amazing background that you have.
Yeah, thank you so much as well. Just echo what Kristen said. It's a real pleasure to join you on your podcast, Deborah. Yeah, as Kristen said, we've been friends for a long time. I actually have my master's in soil science and a background before that in cultural anthropology. And then I've done a variety of things, but for the last 15 years or so, I've been working in the nonprofit world, both nationally and internationally, and have a bit of experience with community-based projects and work, as well as multicultural, multinational, multilinguistic. I just think from my personal experience, diversity in everything makes for a richer life experience, and really a much more creative and interesting one too. So it's great to be really supporting any work that leads to increased diversity in the workplace and in our communities. As Kristen said, I was shifting my work life when she reached out to me and was wanting to make some of the pivots in her business, and it was just a really good fit. I love taking a lot of information in and organizing it and hopefully making it into really accessible, achievable steps. And that's what a lot of the work that I do with Kristen is around, is how do we take this information about the way our brains and bodies work and explain it so someone without any science or physiology background can really understand in a way that's meaningful to their lives, not in a, oh, I know this fact, but like, how can I put this to work for me to help me be at my best? And so a lot of what I do in Dynamic Brains Consulting is the more technical side, but then also the organizational side. And then as we're launching our recently published workbook, we're hoping to pivot into developing some training programs and working with organizations. So the workbook is really for the individual. And then also we're moving into how can organizations and companies and businesses and community groups integrate this information to help everybody be at their best selves.
Said, and it surprises me still that we don't take nutrition and fluids as seriously as we should. Because once again, as somebody that has tried to navigate my own life as a person with invisible disabilities, anxiety and depression, which I wonder who doesn't have that, and ADHD, what I have actually tried really hard to use food in a way that supported my body. But I will tell you, I've had a lot of talks with myself about this, but I found my sugar consumption went up tremendously during COVID-19. And I know that causes depression because it causes me to have depression. So I don't think that we are having enough powerful conversations about these topics, which is why I was so fascinated with the book. And I know, sadly, my husband, who suffered a traumatic brain injury when he was a child when he was hit by a car, nutrition is so critical to his brain, but we don't really talk about these topics. And it's so silly because the one thing that we do have some control over is, assuming you can afford food and water, is what we're putting into our bodies and how we're treating our bodies. And more people are talking about mind body, health and how important it is. And I know we're going to discuss this as well, but What do corporations, what do employers, what do they have to do with this? I don't know. Do you want to have a healthy, productive, innovative, creative workforce? Because I know that if I always eat breakfast, I have a shake because I can put a whole lot of nutrients in there. And if I don't do it, it's the same way what you were saying, Kristen. I don't think right. My head starts hurting. I am certainly not at my best. And first of all, I want to say to you two, why are we not really exploring these topics that make a huge difference? And then, of course, you're going into it. How do we better support people that I want to say we're warehousing our prisoners, but yeah. So people in situations, group settings that, of course, we learned that, of course, became so vulnerable during COVID-19. Yeah. But why are we not? Why do we think this is just a nice to have conversation?
I think what I find when I'm speaking publicly or to groups or organizations or even individuals is that diet culture and weight shape takes precedence. And so any conversation that we have is not, what do I need to do to feel at my best, to have great energy throughout the day, great mental clarity throughout the day. The question is, what do I eat to lose weight as fast as possible? Which we now know billions of people have lost weight quickly. Everybody can do that. And then they quickly gain it back. So we're going to just set that aside as a bad experiment. And what I really have people do is focus on, like, what do you need to eat in order to be at your best? And I think in this COVID moment, it got really hard because we were living at home. We were not able to go out. Some of us couldn't go out and eat, or for a while, we didn't know if we could have food brought in. And so it got complex. And depending on your situation, the two really hard situations were families with small kids and working full time and doing school full time, or utterly alone, utterly cut off from everybody that you knew. And there's a little gray, but of groups that were like that. And then you put in vulnerable populations in that scenario, and the complexity of the conversation. And really, in the last year, the only conversation we've had is what is really the most recent rules of how I navigate life, right? Like that conversation has collapsed completely. But I want to go back to the point that you brought up in terms of, like, sugar has been our best friend for the last year. And it's not just, like, on a terrible, horrible, no good day, I really like ice cream. And I can eat an entire pint of ice cream in about 20 minutes if left to my own devices, right? And what I'm really passionate about is explaining, and we did this in the book, is explaining the physiology of some of those things. And so one of the things that science shows us is 20 minutes after eating sugar or drinking alcohol, we're going to get a signal of tryptophan, more tryptophan past the blood-brain barrier, which is then going to make serotonin. And serotonin is going to tell our brain everything's okay. And I don't know about you, Deborah, but I know Natasha and I have had some days that just simply were not okay this year, right? That was not okay. And so what I know, and I'm not perfect about this, but I do try. I talk to myself and I'm like, okay, I hear that I really want ice cream. And so I will scoop up that ice cream. I'll make 2 scoops and put it in a little bowl. And I will say to myself, I talk about as though I have a committee in my head, because it feels like that. Some people have that experience. I'm like, you can have the entire pint, but first you have to wait 20 minutes after eating your ice cream. And what happens is I eat that ice cream and the sugar gets into my bloodstream. My smart brain, my prefrontal cortex gets some glucose, so it's not my lizard brain that's really all triggered about what's happening, that's running the show. My smart brain starts running the show. I get some glucose. I get the signal that everything's okay. And then I can go about my day. I forget that, like, I was like, oh, I have to eat the entire bite of ice cream. And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really need to do that. Now, I did. there were some days that I'm like, yeah, I don't really care. We're eating an entire pint of ice cream. But if I can slow that down, because I understand that it's important for me not to sit down with the entire pint, because the other thing that I know is our brain, one unit, and it doesn't matter if it's a big bag of potato chips or a small bag of potato chips, in our brain, that's one serving. So whatever is on the plate, that's one serving. So you got to really be clear about that. But we all know that about the serving size, but understanding the drive to have the sugar or have the alcohol, because alcohol drinking has also gone way up. And part of that is because we're grieving that this is not okay. And so part of what I talk about is, let's understand the physiology, the why of it, so that we can use these tools not to be perfect, but just to feel a little better.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and wrap around to the idea of, like, why are we not having these conversations within businesses or organizations, and how can we start to shift that conversation? And I do think that in some ways, I think that this pandemic or COVID moment is going to help us actually shift some of that story that's happening in organizations, because I think, one, after the year we've been through, people's mental health is a little bit more on edge than it used to be. I think people with previous conditions may be experiencing more setbacks or more intensity around that. And I think there's a whole lot of people who are managing like functional anxiety, but that this has pushed us. And then I think when you combine that with, now we're talking about reopening and going back to work, there's all this additional anxiety that's going to be layered into this. And it is going to be very clearly brought into the workplace, whether it's mixed meetings, different formats, not knowing what's expected, not feeling if it's okay or safe, all of this stuff. And I think actually that it presents a really unique opportunity in terms of organizations and businesses are going to have to address this. This is so front and center and is so tied to productivity and to being able to function and get stuff done, that I think this may be that moment. There's, Deborah, you and I were talking about what are the silver linings of this year that we've all been through. And before we got on the air, and I do think that this might be one of them, because we can't deny it anymore. We can't just pretend, because it's even more ubiquitous than it was before. And I think people are going to have a harder time managing it just quietly on their own.
I agree. And we haven't taken this stuff seriously. I know we look at the food that we were feeding our children in schools. We were considering ketchup and pizza as a vegetable. We were. It's horrible.
It's horrible.
And I knew as I was struggling during the intensity of this, but I, like everybody else, I'm walking this COVID-19, but my husband's dementia is getting worse every day. I worry about my daughter. I have never been more happy to get stabbed when I went in to get my first shot of the vaccine. I'm like, do it. But it was interesting as I was feeling, I hate feeling that dark, hopeless feeling. My anxiety and I know each other very well. And I actually went out. I haven't gotten the book yet, and I'm totally going to get the book. And I want to remind everybody, please go out and buy the book. It is, once again, the name of the book, I know I've got it here, Fuel Your Brain, Not Your Anxiety. Love that. Stop the cycle of worry, fatigue, and sugar cravings with simple protein-rich foods. So do buy the book, but also please consider leaving a review. Reviews make a big difference to the authors, and it helps us get our books. It promotes it and shows it to other users. But I was trying to be good, all good, and I went out and I looked to see how many grams of sugar should I be eating as a woman at my weight and everything. And it was 25 grams. And then I looked at, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, what I've been eating. And I had put in the chat window that I have a problem with Butterfingers. But a little baby Butterfinger has 7 grams of sugar anyway. But nothing like some reality there of, wow, the most you should have is 25 grams. Yeah, we're not going to talk about how many I had. Now, I didn't gain the extra weight, but I don't care as much about my weight. I care about being healthy more now. and I want to feel good during the day, and I want my energy level to be stable. I am running my own company. We're starting another nonprofit. Life is very intense. And I was wondering if, for those of people that are listening like me that want to do better, do you mind just spending a little time giving us some tips? And then I do want to make sure that we explore a little bit more about what corporations could be doing, because I had mentioned also, Natasha, we mentioned off air that one of my friends that works for a very large global technology company was told that they have to come back into the office in the next couple of months. And she was like, she was so anxious and so stressed about it. And she was saying, I'm just so freaked out and I'm really scared and I can't do it. And I said, I guess what you have to do is take a breath and listen to what you're being told. What is your anxiety telling you? Can we listen to it? Is my anxiety telling me, Deborah, seriously, don't eat 15 pints of, so one thing corporations are going to be able to do is to be more thoughtful about this. And of course, you are available for consulting. You're happy to come in with them and give them even some temporary solutions. But let's start first and give us some. I can go out and learn. I shouldn't be eating more than 25 grams. I don't even know if that's true. I just saw it on the internet. Must be true. But what are some practical things we can do? I use a little Fitbit, and it reminds me, drink, Deborah, time to drink more water, time to drink. Give us some tips.
So let me back up and just, because I like to talk a little bit about the physiology, and then I'm going to talk about the tips, because I think when people understand the why and the impact, then even though we've heard the tip before, we're more likely to do it. So when we're experiencing anxiety or irritation or agitation, there's a mental component to that and a physical component to that. When my clients were coming in initially and they were having panic attacks, so let's work with that, 10 out of 10. And there are going to be a lot of people that are going to experience a lot of high anxiety going back to work. 1,000 years ago, when we had an anxiety event happening that we might get anxious about, it usually involved physically fighting for our lives. And as somebody who practiced martial arts for 22 years, I'm very skilled at that. And what I understand is that when you're fighting for your life, you want as much adrenaline on board as possible. However, if you're trying to be intellectually smart and attuned, you actually don't want any adrenaline on board. And so how you eat can determine if your smart brain, your prefrontal cortex, is fueled or not. Or if you're in your lizard brain. Just to show you the difference in decision making between your smart brain and your not so smart brain, they did a study. There's a very famous study on judges, and they're reviewing files for parole. They knew they were in a study, so you've heard this one. They're reviewing files for parole, and which means, does a human being get out of a cage or not? Like, very important, life-changing decision. The files that were reviewed immediately after a meal, 65% were considered for parole. Immediately before a meal, so an hour earlier, 0. So that's just like a radically different decision. And so one of the organizations Natasha and I work with is the court system. Because of that study, I'm like, I can explain why. And we don't even know that we're making different decisions. And so when we come to an important decision-making moment, may that be going to work, deciding how we're going to spend money for our corporation, deciding how we're going to negotiate a contract. If we come unfueled, we're at that 0%, right? We're making the most conservative, negative decision we can, because that's our lizard brain is only about survival, not about optimization, where our smart brain might be. Then we can engage it. The really hard thing is we still have the natural biology that when we're nervous about something, we don't eat. And the reason why we don't eat is because, and we're not hungry, is that when we're nervous about something, our vagus nerve shuts down our digestive system, because when you're running from the bear going, wow, I'm hungry, I need to stop and eat, is just a bad idea, right? That's just not in the wiring. And so this moment where we are intellectual warriors is biologically challenging. And so one of the things, so that's the information, right? So that's the physiology. So what is the fix for that? There's a couple of different, for acute situations. If you're going into something and you think you're about to have a panic attack, or you are so enraged because of that email, it's really important to ask yourself, when was the last time I ate? Because I have done a lot. I've spoken a lot to mental health professionals. I've done a lot of trainings and I've surveyed them. And you know what? People don't see panic attacks unless you're 5 hours from food. Unless the food was just carbohydrates. So I have seen where 3 hours early, somebody ate an entire box of red vines, but all that glucose from the red vines is going to be swept out of your bloodstream in about 2 hours. And high levels of sugar are going to sweep it out faster. And so knowing that physiology, what I also know is that when we eat our food with protein, then we double the amount of time that we're in our smart brain. Now, sometimes people with complex PTSD, they have to eat protein every 2 hours. And there will be people emerging from this traumatic event, when they first go to work, they just take a protein shake, and every 2 hours they're just drinking a quarter of it to be like, I'm fueling my smart brain, I'm fueling my smart brain, I'm fueling my smart brain. And then over time that will expand. But one of the things we educate people about in the book is an experiment. What we call it is eat protein every 3 hours, and you have breakfast with carbs. We don't count carbs. How many carbs you should eat in a day, like that it's a little bit of a deceitful number, because you don't know how many carbs you need. Depends on how much exercise you are, how much you sleep, what else you're eating, what your age is. I don't track carbs, but I do track protein. And what I see is that people have to get about 70 grams of protein and it divided throughout the day in order to have a stable brain for mental health.
So let me ask you a question here, because I imagine some of our viewers might be thinking, oh, she's saying eat a high protein diet.
Yeah.
She's saying eat the Atkins diet or something. Yeah. So I just was wondering if you could.
No, actually, unless you're pretty petite, like 120 pounds, 70 grams of protein is pretty much on RDA. This is not high protein diet. This is pretty much spot on, if not deficient, for people's weight. So if we were in a room together, probably you would have been like, she is tall. Because I'm about 6 foot and I'm 185 pounds and I'm putting on muscle mass. And so I need to be getting about 80 grams of protein. And on our website, we have lots of trainings on the specific and handouts. And we're going to give you a link to like all of our favorite information to go through the specifics, so you can have a video that explains it and handouts to do that. But this is not a high protein diet. This is just getting protein throughout the day. And so like eggs for breakfast within an hour of waking with a piece of toast and an apple. And then a handful of nuts for lunch or for a snack 3 hours later. We're not talking a lot of protein. We're just saying, here's a little bit of fuel so that you can get to the next segment, so that you don't get deficient. And because as your blood glucose drops, that adrenaline is part of a natural complement of hormones that if you don't eat, you're going to eat your body. That's the reality of it, right? And not only are you eating your body, but you're eating your muscle mass, because fat mass doesn't come off until like weeks later. It just, right? And so you're actually taking away the very substance that helps your brain work and helps you stay healthy. And so we have to eat protein throughout the day to stabilize our blood glucose, because we're not getting enough exercise, because we're no longer manually engaged, and because we are intellectually engaged for more than 8 hours out. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So how does the fluids come into it, the water?
But fluids, I'm always like to eat, at least drink a third of your weight in water. So if you're 150 pounds, you just need to be getting water throughout the day. And ideally, you just stash it in the morning, get a good 12 to 24 ounces in the morning, and then divide it out and slow it down towards the evening, because otherwise you're just up peeing all the time. Yeah. But in terms of how this benefits companies, I'm going to let Natasha talk about, but making sure that people feel empowered to fuel themselves throughout the day, and that we start caring for our workmates, in that if we see somebody who's really getting worked up, like the best thing we can do is give them a quarter cup of juice, which I know juice is like, oh no, don't drink juice because of weight gain and stuff. But we're talking a quarter cup, which is enough to get fuel to your smart brain and shut off that bear in the room panic attack. And I've had this happen since COVID, before COVID. People come into my office and they're like, woo! And you're like, juice? Nuts? And then drink it. And you just see them like click in. And you're like, oh, hi. And I'm, hi, what happened? Oh my God, this thing just happened. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's problem solve. But if they're in survival brain, it's all about, I'm about to get killed and I'm not going to survive. I'm going to run or I'm going to go kill it, which is not problem solving in our world.
Mm-hmm. Or I'm just going to disappear and pretend that nothing exists. I'm just going to shrink down what I have to deal with. Yeah. And we see that a lot, I think, as well. There was some study, this was pre-COVID a few years ago, about the increased number of people, say, like basically they were like going into the bathroom and essentially just hiding, because no one could really say you're going to the bathroom too much. And that was their way of, I can't deal with this, I have to go to the bathroom. And then they would just close the door and stay there for half an hour just because they just didn't want to deal with anything. But I think those are all really good tips that we have. Like Kristen said, we have a lot of worksheets and tip sheets on our website that are freely available. And we go into a lot of the why and how and where to insert these into your lives to make it really functional for you in the book. And it really isn't, before we talk about operationalizing it, one of the things that I hear a fair amount is like, oh, Americans eat too much protein to begin with. Like, really, what did you have for breakfast? Cereal, a bagel, maybe with a little cream cheese. Because again, the weight, it really is a sandwich with maybe a slice of turkey. There's this perception that some people have that Americans specifically eat a lot of meat and protein. But in reality, when I challenge people to really reflect on it and list out what they've eaten, it's really carbs. It's really almost all carbs. Right.
And Natasha, I also want to just point out, because I have a son that is a vegan. He's been a vegan. He's been a vegan now, I guess, almost 20 years. But as you were saying, Kristen, protein is not just meat. I love walnuts. I love walnuts. So if somebody's listening and they're a vegetarian or they're a vegan, I just was wondering if y'all would incorporate some of that in there too, because I know a lot of the younger people are choosing those lifestyles, but they can stay very healthy as well.
We have a whole handout for plant-based diets just to make sure that help people track that they're getting enough protein in. And part of what we're educating people about is just to be aware of, is what they're eating actually meeting their biological needs. And how we know that is that we have good energy and mental clarity.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. And I've found for people that I know in my life who are vegetarian or vegan, when they actually sit down and start thinking about what they're eating, they find that they need to actually be much more purposeful about getting in the amount of protein that their body needs. It's not that it can't be done, but there is a little bit more planning and thought, it seems, that needs to go into it, because just the volumes of what you eat are different for the protein that you get from it. But yeah, we have a lot of plant-based as well as animal-based solutions.
I just thought I'd bring that up in case people were wondering. But okay, so Natasha, give some advice to the corporations. Once again, I know you ladies are available. You have all kind of things on your website, but it just seems to me that just going back to business as usual is not going to be very good for us right now. I think that there needs to be some real deliberateness about what's happening. And so I was just wondering if y'all would address that.
Yeah, I think deliberateness is a really great way to frame it, Deborah. I think what we have seen and where really significant change can take place, and it is sometimes the only way significant change can take place within a business or an organization or a corporation, is through really committed leadership. And that doesn't mean lip service. That doesn't mean just saying the right things and then moving on. It means actually role modeling, eating snacks, role modeling. If you're in an all-day retreat, getting up and having time for stretches, or bringing someone in to lead a 15-minute movement, something that everyone can feel comfortable doing. It means snacking. So actually doing these things. But it also is required to make any kind of structural shifts. And a lot of the court systems that we've worked in terms of getting protein into the systems and made available to people coming into the court system, there have been signs in some court systems that say no food allowed. And yet people often come in not having eaten. They're anxious. They don't really know the system. They don't know what's happening. They don't know how long they're going to be there. And they then have no food or water allowed. You're not going to get your most responsive, optimized person in front of you taking in the information and trying to figure it out. People are going to be responding from that reactive or lizard brain in a much more fight or flight type of mode, which is part of the problem with the court system and the penal system that we have. And so even just getting rules like that changed that may exist in different industries or different systems require a real commitment from leadership to make that happen, to understand the physiology, to understand why this is important for their bottom line, or for reducing secondary trauma for their staff who are dealing with people who are in their lizard brains all day long because they have no food or drink. So I think that's a really important piece of it. And I think in terms of more broadly businesses and organizations, as people are returning to work, I think there's real power in naming and acknowledging a trauma or an anxiety or the situation that we're in, and allowing for that and creating space where it's finding ways to integrate into the culture of that organization that taking care of yourself is good for the employee, it's good for your bottom line, it's good for the coworkers, that, all the way through. And really allowing that to naming it and then allowing for that positive growth moving forward helps people move through the trauma and get to the other side and feel more stable in their bodies and brains and in their work situation. And a really easy way, if a lot of organizations have, whether they typically fill it or not, they have a kitchen area or a lunch break area, considering stocking that either with snacks or with food that is higher in protein, making it not providing time throughout the day for people to actually go and do that or get outside or whatever it is. I think that integrating it into the structure of the work routine is a really important way to do that. And that's one thing that leadership can definitely educate themselves on and step in and do. And then even in Zoom, the Zoom meetings, or I'm just saying Zoom, more online virtual meetings, having your nuts and munching on them, showing that normalizing that behavior is just visibly is a great way to do it.
And taking time also, Deb, with those big meetings that you're having, to give people deliberate breaks.
Absolutely.
It's okay, let's all go get a cup of tea or some water and nuts. And I've started noticing people doing that. I was on a panel this morning with BDF in London, and they were being very deliberate about giving quick breaks and encouraging people, get up, walk around, go get some water, because we're just going from meeting after meeting, and that is not good for our brains either. But let me tell you, I know we're almost out of time. So what I want to do, I definitely want to make sure that people know where to get the book, how to get to your website, how to get hold of both of you. But I also want to give you both a little bit, I want to give you time to have a final comment as well. So let me turn it over to Kristen. I don't know if you want to start, but I just want to make sure people know how to find you and know how to get your book and know how to engage with you.
I'm going to let Natasha put all that information out because she'll be more efficient about it than I will be.
Yeah, so you can find us at KristenAllott.com or proteinforall.org. And then and also on social media under Protein for All is our handle for Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And then our book, Fuel
Natasha?
Your Brain, Not Your Anxiety, is available. Oh,
Hey.
sorry.
No, I'm just so sorry. When you say protein for all or
F-O-R.
F-O-R?
F-O-R.
Thank you. Only because I see people doing AI for good, but so it's F-O-R. I just want to make sure people have that. Excuse me.
Thank you. No, that's a good catch. And then our book is available really at most booksellers. So on Amazon, through New Harbinger, who's our publisher, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Target, pretty much any of those major book outlets you can find us at. And I guess in terms of a closing, just quickly, I'd just like to finish, whether it's in the workplace or with your family or with the community, however people define their community. I think the other thing that sharing food or providing food, making time for food does is it provides an opportunity for that connection and for actually strengthening and developing community. So it gives an opportunity in the example that Kristen gave earlier for you to say, hey, are you doing okay? Let's share a meal, let's share a snack, and sort of level set, because that relationship piece and a supportive relationship piece is also a really important part that we didn't touch on today, but it's a really important part of supporting mental health and feeling like you have a supportive community at work as well as in personal lives and community lives that we all lead is another piece of that puzzle.
Yeah. And I would just wrap up in that I really appreciate what you do, Deborah, in terms of helping people think about being inclusive. And as we move to being back together again, being really conscious about that many of us are going to carry the burden of this year. And it may not show up in the first month. And PTSD doesn't necessarily show up right away. And it will help the individual, it'll help the communities, it'll help the organizations if there's a consciousness about it and we don't put it in the background. And one of the things that will help us stay conscious about it and help us see when we that something's coming up is if we have a baseline of we're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to encourage people to eat regularly, get good sleep habits. We're not going to email at midnight, or certainly we're not going to require people to respond. We're going to give time for people to move their bodies. We're going to increase the opportunity for people to take care of themselves because we value that they are intellectual beings who are supporting us and that we need them to be at their best. We don't need to monitor them all the time because they will perform at their best because we value them as a human being.
Yeah, I love the work that you do, and I think it's very important. And I just think that some people might think that these are not important topics, but if you want your employees to come back and be productive and healthy and happy, and as Kristen said, a lot of times post-traumatic stress disorder, it might not show up for years later. We've learned that with our military.
Yeah.
It's very important that right now, if you want to lead and you want to be a good leader, you have to make sure that we're taking care of everybody. I love the points you were making. You see somebody, which we do sometimes. You see a coworker you can see they're frazzled. Yeah. What can you do to help them to just be empathetic? Yeah. It's empathy. But I know that employers are really struggling with everybody coming back, but they really need to think about things like this that before we thought these were nice to have. This is a nice to have. This is whether or not we fuel our bodies or not. This is whether or not we can, this is the relationships we have with each other. This is how we use our brains for complex problem solving. These things are important.
Well said.
Yeah, and this
well
is
said.
why I just love the work, and I was glad that my producer, Doug Foresta, sent you to me, because this is very important conversation. And COVID-19, those people that got it, it caused brain bleeds and we know dementia, and don't want to depress everybody, but there's some real realities we're all facing, and we have to be better about taking care of ourselves and our loved ones, our employees, our team members, our friends, our families. So I highly recommend getting the book, and thank you both. Thank you for everything you're doing, and y'all keep changing the world. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Deborah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work, brought to you by Rue Global Impact. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your audio. To learn more about Rue Global Impact and the services we provide, visit rueglobal.com. To learn more about how you can become a sponsor of Human Potential at Work, email David at rueglobal.com. That's David at rueglobal.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next time with a new episode.